Yeah, we're live now. Once again live. Cool. Oh, ça c'est bon? No, it's okay. We're just going to do a quick setup here of the GoPro for our wonderful guests here in store at AudioSource in Lausanne, Switzerland. Okay, cool. We good now? Yeah, excellent. Okay. So, hello everybody. Hello everybody in the store. Hello everybody in Facebook land as well. Welcome to the next session here at AudioSource in Lausanne, Switzerland. It's a wonderful store here. I'm looking around. We've got some wonderful customers here, but also I'm looking at all these fantastic synthesizers and feeling slightly jealous as well over there. But actually, not too jealous, because we're going to look at an incredible synthesizer ourselves during this session. This session is going to be covering the Novation PEAK. This is the second session today here from AudioSource. Earlier today we took a good look at the mono station, the new groove box from Novation, with the analog synth, the base station synthesizer, and also the circuit sequencer. But this is going to be looking at the new Poly desktop from Novation. This is the Novation PEAK, and this is a bit of a beast, I have to be honest. This is a very powerful synthesizer, and for myself, as a product specialist at Novation, you know, it's a bit of a dream come true, really, to have been working on a project like this. To be honest, this is the sort of thing that I like to use myself, and to be able to kind of have a hand in building this thing has been a very, very proud part of my career, to be honest. Anyway, enough of all this gushing. Encore, il faut que je dise que je vais faire la présentation en anglais. S'il vous plaît, ça va être un petit peu mieux pour moi parce que c'est un petit peu difficile à parler avec le langage technical de le synthétiseur. So yes, so this is obviously going to be in English for everybody over in Facebook land as well. And let's take a look at the PEAK. So here it is. It's a desktop synthesizer. It's not a keyboard synth. It's a desktop synthesizer. It has 8 voices. It has 3 oscillators per voice. And it's a combination of both digital and analog technology. So we have a little phrase we like to use. We say it's analog where it matters and digital where it counts. You know, so it's kind of a nice little way to think about it. And basically, it's got some very interesting technology inside the box here. Now, there are plenty of demonstrations of all the various different sections about the PEAK, and this will go into some depth about those as well. But there's a lot of information out there. To be honest, one of the things I would recommend that you all do, if you've not had a chance to do so already, they're appearing in stores now. You know, the stock is starting to come through into your local stores, and the thing about PEAK is I would recommend you go and listen to it, because, you know, it's quite easy to listen to it on a computer, you know, with YouTube and the compression of YouTube and, you know, on your small speakers and that sort of thing. But actually, when you get your hands on with this thing, I think that's when it really comes alive. So, just to explain how I'm kind of set up here. As I said, it's a desktop synthesizer. It's not a keyboard version. This was a decision that we took at the beginning. The first thing is, obviously, it's going to keep the cost down of the unit. To put a key mech in this, a key mechanism in this, would increase the cost. But also, a lot of people in the world of synthesizers, I mean, I include myself in this as well, is we've got lots and lots of black and white notes. We've got lots and lots of clavier, lots of keyboards around. And you know, in my studio, for example, space is a premium. You know, space is quite a difficult thing to find in there. So to have a desktop system like this, which is not a huge footprint, but actually packs the real power of the synthesizer, is a nice thing. And also, you know, a lot of people are kind of maybe not so much keyboard players these days, but maybe they've learned to make their music on the grid. You know, things like the launch pad, the Novation launch pads, the circuit as well, of course. You know, maybe some people kind of prefer to play that way. So this, by making a desktop system, it saves on space, it saves on the cost, the overall price, and also it gives you the choice of how you control that instrument as well. So let's have a look at the actual synthesizer and what's going on inside here. I just made this wonderful little patch before, and all this is just a major chord using the 3 oscillators. There's a little bit of filtering on there as well. But this has got a very kind of analog sort of style sound. Let's take the reverb and effects off so you can hear it in its raw form. So you can hear it's got this kind of very analog sort of feel to it, but as I mentioned, it's a hybrid synthesizer. We have both digital technology and analog technology in here. So just to explain how that works. The oscillators are digital. So we have digital oscillators here. The control is all digital as well. The LFOs, the envelopes, all of that sort of thing, they're all digital controls. But this section in the middle here, so if I kind of just outline here, so put the effects to one side, this section here is the analog section. And basically we have an analog filter, analog VCA amplifier, 3 analog distortion points as well. So analog where it matters and digital where it counts. I mentioned before we've got our digital oscillators, and that's great. I mean, this gives us a lot of power. It gives us a lot more scope and power and opportunities than traditional analog oscillator types do, because of course we can use things like wavetables, which we have in here. We can use the digital waveforms to do a whole variety of different things. But when you're working with a digital synthesizer, really what's happening is there's a DSP, a digital signal processor inside the synthesizer. And after that is a method of taking that digital signal and creating an analog signal which can get passed to our speakers and eventually our analog ears. So this is a digital to analog converter, a DAC. It's the sort of thing that you'll find everywhere in your audio interfaces, you know, your sound cards that you're using with your music software. And often, well, more often than not, they're also using those same sort of sample rates as well. So if you're familiar with the sample rates on your audio interface, you'll be familiar with the terms 44.1, 48 kilohertz, 96 kilohertz. All of these are traditional, if you like. I say traditional, I don't know if that's the right word, but these are, sample rates that we use for this sort of software, for capturing and working within the digital realm. With the PEAK, we've tried a different approach, so much so that we've actually been happy enough to name these oscillators because of the technology that's involved. I should explain, one of the lead designers on this synthesizer is a guy that we work with at Novation, a guy called Chris Huggett, who is, well, in my opinion, one of the finest synthesizer makers from the UK, from England, that we've had. There have been a number of good synthesizer companies, you know, EMS and all those kind of guys, right back in the 60s. But in the late 70s and early 80s, Chris came onto the scene. And Chris is the guy who developed initially a synthesizer called the Wasp, the Electronic Dream Plant Wasp, which you will definitely recognize if you ever see one, because it looks a little bit like a wasp. Petit Vespide, so it's yellow and black, common Vespide. So that's one of his initial synthesizers. But after that, in the early mid 80s, he also created a thing called the Oscar as well. And the Oscar has become a classic synthesizer. And now when you see them appear on eBay, they ask for ridiculous prices for these things. But a wonderful synth. Chris has been with Novation since the very beginning as well. He was one of the lead designers on the synthesizer engine of the original bass station, which I think was back in 1993. And he also worked on all the Nova synths throughout the Novation sort of Nova period, if you like, when they were making the synthesizers. And as I say, he's the lead designer here on the PEAK. And one of the things that Chris has done, which I think is really, really important, actually, probably in the timeline of digital synthesizers, is that instead of using a DSP processor and a DAC after that to get the analog output from your digital oscillators, Chris has found a very clever way of using a different type of chip on the PEAK, and this is called an FPGA. Now, an FPGA is basically like a digital signal processor. It's pretty much the same thing, but it's a very versatile processor, and you can make little sections and basically design it to do several things at once and do, basically it's like a processor that you have total control and you can dictate what you're going to do with that. But the real clever part is that Chris has managed to work out a way to be able to take the oscillators directly from that processor without really the need for a DAC, for a digital to analog converter. Of course, there is a digital to analog conversion process there, but this is using a single bit. So again, when we're talking about sample rates, we have 16-bit, 24-bit, and all this sort of thing. This is a resolution. With the way that we're working here, we have a single bit, just one bit, but this is moving at the same speed as the processor, and therefore is able to produce the oscillators at the same speed as the processor. So instead of 48 kilohertz, for example, which is a standard sample rate you'll find in digital synthesizers, we're able to use 24 megahertz of output. Now that means instead of 48,000 snapshots, little slices of the sound per second, we have 24 million. That's 500 times more than a 48 kilohertz sample rate. And of course what this does is it means that the digital oscillators that are being produced here are essentially, to our human ears, behaving as if they're being produced in the analog world. Now, obviously, there's lots of discussions and sometimes fights between the digital and analog world. But I think the reality is with the PEAK synthesizer, we've now got to a point where the oscillators are actually producing a sound that is the sort of sound you will find from an analog oscillator. There are other things to mention as well, you know. On old synthesizers, and I guess some of the modern ones as well, but on old voltage controlled synthesizers, the analog sound is often really due to the way that the tuning is imperfect. So the tuning and scaling of the oscillator might not just be exactly tempered exactly as it would be if it was digital. And that is often a big part of the sound as well. These are obviously digital oscillators, and they are completely stable. There is no tuning issues in there. So these do kind of have a digital side as well, if you like. They're very stable, very true, and there's no discrepancy or no issues on the tuning side. But we can apply that to it if we want. So we can make it sound like an older analog sort of system. So that's really one of the key things I would say about the PEAK. The fact that, yes, this section is digital, but it's working at ridiculously high sample rates, 24 million times a second. I mean, if you imagine a sine wave being drawn and you're operating, let's say, at 48 kilohertz, for that sine wave, every second there are going to be 48,000 images of that sine. So you'll have little sort of steps, if you like, for every 48,000th of a second. Every 24 millionth of a second, to our human ears is going to be really pretty imperceivable. And this actually removes what we call an issue, well, not an issue, but a feature, if you like, of digital oscillators called aliasing. And essentially, the higher up the frequency range you go, you will find kind of almost like a backwash of extra frequencies flowing back down there and adding extra aliasing or artifacts to the sound. With the PEAK, because of the speed and the resolution of the oscillators, it's way beyond our human hearing. In fact, it's probably beyond bat hearing. It's that kind of level. So, well, let's have a listen to it. On my setup here, I mentioned earlier, I've got my, we don't have a keyboard on this, so I'm actually going to control this from my circuit here, which I have set up next to me. And I've just got my MIDI output here, just going directly to the MIDI input on the back of the PEAK. This is outputting on MIDI channel 1, so my MIDI channel is set to MIDI channel 1 here. And I'm going to just save that sound that I made because I really quite liked it. It's quite a basic sound, but I'm going to save it and then just quickly move it to here. Yep, save there, and yep, save. Yep, that's it. So I've got that patch, which means I can now initialize this next patch. And here is just a sawtooth again. As I say, it's a polysynth. I can play chords. I can play up to 8 notes at one time on this synth. So again, that's a really useful thing. Polyphonic is a very useful, very useful thing to have. You don't have to play polyphonically. You can, of course, play as if it was a mono synth. But the fact that we've got these extra notes is great. So here is a basic sawtooth waveform. And again, I've got a switch here. This moves me now to a square. We'll come to more in a minute. That's quite an interesting one. Here is a sine wave. And here's a triangle waveform as well. Now, the waveforms, the triangle, the sawtooth, and the square are produced numerically. This is using mathematics to generate the waveform. So these are what we call NCOs, numerically controlled oscillators. The sine wave itself is a wavetable. So the sine wave is actually, again, it's a mathematically generated sine wave, but this is actually based around a series of different waveforms that we can move and morph between. So for example, here on the sine wave, if I use this control, the shape amount, we can hear that's able to really add some extra tonality and harmony and overtones to the sound. That's a sine wave, but we have shape control. So we have the ability to, manipulate the waveform even further. If I go to my triangle waveform, here the shape amount starts to act like a wave folding control. And the great thing about this is that we're starting to get into the realms of additive synthesis as well. So we have a subtractive synthesizer in a traditional way, so with traditional oscillator shapes and a filter to subtract harmonics from it. But we also have the ability to use a basic waveform and add extra harmonies to it as well. So again, this is an additive style. The sawtooth is interesting. Here, if I use the shape amounts, we get into a famous Novation sound. This is called the sort of the super saw sound. It's quite a big sound in trance music. If we listen to it as a straightforward sawtooth, there it is. If I bring up, you can hear now how that's changing the sound. If we had an oscilloscope, you'd see that actually we're producing two sawtooths by using this as well. Now, with the shape amount, I'm using the manual control. The manual control here is just letting me change the position of the shape, like this. I can keep it fixed at this position. But I also have modulation I can apply. And here we have LFO1. So this is going to take this LFO1 low frequency oscillator. So this is a slow moving oscillation, a slow moving shape. And I can apply that slow moving shape to control this control here. So let's bring in some LFO1. And if you look at the flashing LED here, hopefully you can see that that's in time now with that shape change. And if I speed up, so this is just a sawtooth waveform with shape being LFO'd, so very complex. A very complex sound before we've even gone anywhere near the filter. In fact, this is just a simple single oscillator at the moment. So very powerful stuff. Okay, so let's go to the square. And as you would expect with the square, the shape amount is the pulse width. And if I go all the way anti-clockwise, oh, of course, I'm on the LFO. Let's go to the manual. If I go all the way anti-clockwise, we can close off the actual waveform itself. Now with a square wave, of course, a square is perfectly symmetrical, so the break, if you like, on the waveform is exactly in the middle. And if I go all the way over to the far side, I can basically stop the energy from the waveform. So that's what we call through zero. And again, I can LFO that. He says, to get quite rhythmic effects as well. So we can use that almost like a little tremolo effect, if you like, just on the oscillator. Once again, we're just having one oscillator with a little bit of LFO on the shape amount there. Right, now let's move to the more. Now, I'll just demonstrate this. If I'm on a screen here, on my menu, here is just the patch screen to give me the initial patch, the initialization patch. If I use the buttons here and I get to the more option, now the screen automatically changes, and this is really useful because this automatically takes me to oscillator 1, wave more here. And this now gives me the opportunity to choose the extra waveforms that we have available. And even though we have our traditional analog waveforms directly from the button here, I also have, well, initially another sine wave. This is a sine wave that is actually sampled from the base station. But if I choose a different waveform, maybe this one, we're now getting into wave table, and you can hear the different wave shapes and how the wave shape amount control interpolates, moves smoothly between those sounds. And again, we've got some very complex waveforms, very complex sounds again being created before we've even left the oscillator section. So the on the wavetable, we've got 17 wavetables, and they go right the way through from, for example, Vox, so voice, ooh and R, and format, nice format kind of shapes. Let's see, we'll go ya, e as well, so we get kind of nice, that kind of nice sound again. And again, we can modulate that. And that's starting to make my mouth move automatically. Excuse me. Ooh. Okay, so we've got 17 different wavetables on there. So even, right at the very beginning, we've got a lot of power here. And so far, we've just listened to this, oscillator 1. So, the ability that we've got here is huge. So, for example, let's bring in a second oscillator. I'll go to my mixer. At the moment, the mixer is actually sort of set like this. When you initialize a patch, oscillator 1 is up, oscillator 2 and 3 are down. By the way, I should point out this button. This button is an absolute godsend. This is incredible. It's an initialize button, and it means I can have a crazy patch on the go. Let's go to patch. Let's get a crazy patch on the go. Let's go this one. Not too crazy, but you get the idea. You're playing a patch, it's like, oh, let's start again. Press initialize. And you're back to that sawtooth on its own. That's a very, very powerful tool when you're working on a synthesizer like this, because you can just instantly go back to a zero central starting point and then build your sound from there. So let's do that. Let's go to Wave More. What did we have? We had the yoi sound, I think it was. Yeah. Put a bit of LFO on there. Great. And then let's bring in oscillator 2. So this is now a combination of a sawtooth and a wavetable as well. Let's go to a square, maybe do some pulse width on there, maybe put some LFO on there. So again, straight away we're getting into a deep, nice deep sound, but this is just 2 oscillators. Let's just detune them a little bit. So great sound, and it's just using these 2 controls here. In terms of the other controls, let's just bring down oscillator 2. We've got octave controls, so 8 foot, 4 foot, 2 foot, 16 foot as well for low sounds. So we've got a nice range control of the octaves. We also have a nice coarse pitch control, which gives us an octave either way. So one thing I want to point out here, maybe this is best demonstrated with a straightforward with a square wave or whichever, just a basic waveform. That's a very smooth movement. Okay, so it's a digital control. If we use traditional MIDI, we have 128 steps, 128 positions in traditional MIDI. That's 7-bit MIDI. We use 8-bit MIDI here, so we have twice as many. So we have 256 steps here. And we also have smoothing or slewing to basically make that be as smooth as possible. But we want it to behave, even though it's a digital control, we want it to behave as if it was a voltage control, which is always a very smooth control. So it's very important to consider the fact that the important parameters that we have on the Peak's top panel are able to be controlled with 8-bit MIDI. I can kind of demonstrate that actually. If I go into the depth here, and let's go for this. Yep. And now I can basically change the pitch with a 7-bit control, so you can hear the difference. You can hear that change. You can hear the steps there. The sustain on the envelope is 7-bit. It doesn't need to be 8 bits. But if we listen to that compared now, so you can hear how by using 8-bit you have a really strong, more natural and more old school style sort of control, if you like. So let's bring in that other octave. So let's bring in the third oscillator. So again, we're just listening to the oscillators. I've just dropped that down an octave. Let's put some saw shape there. Okay, maybe a bit less. That's a big sound. That's just one note. That's one voice, but with 3 oscillators there. So, you know, use a lot of power already. If I start to play chords, you're going to... You see, it's already quite a complex and interesting sound with movement as well, because we have a bit of LFO controlling the oscillators. But this is just, you know, just the oscillators, nothing more. So the fact that these are digital means that we can do all of these great things. With traditional analog oscillators, of course, which are your, well, triangle, sawtooth, square, and sine as well, those 4 are sort of fixed in terms of what you can do. Obviously, with pulse width on the square wave, you can add a bit of change to that. There is wave folding that can be done on the triangles as well, but the fact that we've got this shape control really opens up the possibilities with those oscillators. And then, of course, we have all that wavetable goodness to play with as well. So that's the oscillators, but then what happens when we go into the filter? So here we've got our filter. This is a true analog filter. It's an OTA filter, operational something amplifier, I think, I can't remember exactly. It's the filter that was originally, well, Chris originally designed this filter, or, you know, a variation of this filter on the Wasp synthesizer, and then that filter was taken onto the base station, original base station, and through into the base station 2, and also onto the Peak. But it's got a lovely, nice, warm sound. I believe Roland were using OTA their filters in the 80s as well, you know, on their SH101s, Juno 106s, that sort of thing. So it's actually got a similar kind of character. A lot of people do think it's got a similar character to the old Roland sound. It's a very resonant filter, so if I... hear that, the resonance isn't on full there, but let's, if I just bring the volume down, because it's going to get naughty now. So, yep, that's resonance. Of course, if I bring the oscillators down, let's get through the distortions. Oh, I'm playing many notes. There we go, that's why. So there's, we've got our sine wave generated directly just by the filter. All the oscillators are turned down there. So on the filter as well, we've got some interesting controls. We've got an LFO. So we've got the LFO1 here, automatically controlling the filter. So we can use that to do that, or we can use the envelope 1, so I can kind of... So I can use the envelope there to control the filter as well. But one thing that I, excuse me, I really love on this filter control section is this, oscillator 3 filter modulation. Now, in a lot of old synthesizers, you'd find the third oscillator is kind of maybe a little bit of a, let's say, a reduced function oscillator. And often that's because it could be used as a low-frequency oscillator rather than an actual oscillator in the traditional sense. All 3 oscillators on Peak are identical, so it doesn't matter. So you're not thinking that this is a low-frequency oscillator that you can use to control. This is an audio rate oscillator with wavetables, with all the analog stuff, with the wave shaping. It's pretty much identical. Well, it is identical to the others. But we have a control here which takes this oscillator as a very fast LFO, basically, fast control source for the filter. So here is the filter without any modulation from oscillator 3. Let's bring that in. So now, oh, I've got a bit of LFO on there, haven't I? So if I just listen to that now, that's just oscillator 3 controlling the filter. And if I start to maybe detune, so you can get some very interesting filter sounds with that. But I can also take it down. So it's now 16, so the lowest octave with the chords control right down. Let's go to our wave shapes and get some crazy sounds. And if I go for 1/10 depth, So now I've got an LFO that is following that wavetable shape, which is quite unusual. It's a strange sounding LFO. It's like a combination of different LFOs. But if I change the shape, you can kind of get some, yeah, I mean this sounds a little bit unusual of course, but it's just really to demonstrate how the filter modulation here can control the oscillator. If I wanted to, I can also fix this oscillator to a note. So I go here and I click through to the Wave More page and I open up the Oscillator 3 menu and I have the ability to say, okay, fixed note. Let's just put this on the lowest possible MIDI note, C-2, and now it was probably just set to that anyway. Oh, here we go. So now if I actually listen to those, that oscillator with the others, okay. Let's initialize the patch first, yeah. There we go, it's a bit quiet. So, and bring in oscillator 3, go to Wave More, fixed note. Let's fix that on a C3. So you can basically hold that oscillator on a pitch, and then of course I can play around that, but that pitch is always going to be fixed. So that's quite useful as well, and especially if we start to use that as a modulation source. So on the filter, other things as you would expect, you know, we saw LFO, we've got an envelope here. So envelope 1 is automatically set to the filter. You can hear it's a very, very snappy envelope. The decay there is really, really snappy. Or we can have it nice and long. I think it's 18 seconds or something like that on the full settings. There's a really long decay there. So it's a very musical kind of envelope. You can find the right point that you want with it. So that's the envelope there. But also I can make the amplifier envelope control it as well. So I actually have a combination now of envelope 1 and the amplifier envelope, the dedicated envelope for the amplifier. Actually control the filter at the same time, so that's kind of quite nice. On the filter we have a low pass, a band pass, and a high pass. So and we also have different slopes as well. So at the minute this is 12 dB per octave. Let's listen to that. Again, that's quite an extreme. Well, I say it's extreme. It's a 4-pole, 24 dB octave control, cutoff control. If I go to the 12 dB, it's a lot less aggressive, if you like. So the 12 dB is great for pad sounds, and the 24 dB is better for kind of your bass kind of sounds, I would say. Resonance, we've seen the super resonance of the filter as well, and then here the overdrive. This is great. So here is oscillator 1, filter open, resonance down. We're just hearing the raw sound of oscillator 1. If I bring the overdrive in, basically it's acting like a gain control now with that oscillator. So if I have two oscillators playing, or two notes playing, you see there's a lot of power there in that oscillator. You can use that, of course, to roll into the filter. Kind of really push that level into the filter. That's an analog overdrive, and that's basically a gain control, as I say, pushing into the filter. But we have other controls as well. So if I go to, for example, my voice page here, on the voice page I have filter post drive. Filter post drive is another analog distortion. This is after the filter. So it's after the filter and before the amplifier. So that down. So you can see it's got quite a nice sound. If I do the combination, okay, we've got quite a big sound there. If I bring these down again now, and we'll look at this one. This is the distortion. So here's a sine, and this distortion. This is a really heavy one. Let's put it on a harmonic rich. Bring in the voice as well. Hear the distortion there. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do with the filter as well. So we've got this really powerful oscillator section running into the filter. And then after this, on the signal path, is the effects as well. Now the effects, I think, are really nice. Let's go back to that sound that I started with, which was Bank C. No, I was on Bank D, wasn't I? And gosh, where did I save it? The other great thing, of course, we've got our patches here. So here we are, yeah. Let's just get that back in. There we go. So, just a nice major chord here. Now here are my effects. I have to say the reverb is probably my favourite out of these. They're all great. I mean the chorus, for example. It's got a really nice sound. You can get really into control of it as well. Here we've got the rate, which is lovely. We have delay as well, so let's just bring the amp down. Let's just let that settle. And if I can maybe put an arpeggiator. That can be really useful as well. Anyway, that's the delay. So we've got the delay in the chorus. Let's go back to our sounds. And then, as I say, my favourite, which I would say is the reverb. I've just put it on full length here, and this is, I think it's about 2 minutes worth of reverb tail, which is... And also, if I use the type here, I can change the size of the room. And you can hear that slew effect as the room gets bigger. If I change to a smaller room, it's going to get even smaller and raise in pitch. Which is a great thing. But the reverb is really sweet. If I want to, I can bypass the whole of the effects. And this means now that the signal is coming out at this point, which is the analog output point. Of course, the effects here, they're digital effects, so we generate the sound here from the analog section, and then this is running parallel, which allows me to go in. And I can do other clever things. So I have a menu here as well. One thing I should say is on the top panel, you know, if we just remove this section here with the menu, we've got pretty much everything here that we would ever need for a wonderful synthesizer. But inside the menu as well, we have extra features, including on the effects page, routing. So at the minute, everything is routing. The signal is going through each, the chorus, delay, and the reverb at the same time in parallel. But I can use this control here and change the position of them. So maybe I want to go chorus into delay to reverb, which is the way that it's laid out here. But maybe I want to go reverb into the chorus, into the delay. And I can do that as well here. And I've got lots of other things as well. For example, we've got damping on the low pass and high pass for the delays. We've also got damping on the reverbs as well, so we can really start to shape and manipulate the effects. They're not just on or off. There's a lot of control in there. Okay, so that's the kind of the bottom part of the synth here. That's the sound generation. And then up at the top here we have our LFOs and envelopes. There are two LFO sections. I say sections because it's an 8-voice synthesizer. There's an LFO, or there's 2 LFOs per voice in here. There's 8 filters, there's 8 amplifiers, there's 16 LFOs as well for each voice. Yeah, well, no, for each, well, inside the box, not for each voice. That would be crazy. But you know, there's a lot of power inside here. And one thing is nice to try, and I'll just do, let's get an LFO on. So this is normal now. I say normal, this is automatically connected. We have LFO1 depth, we have an LFO1 control on the top panel. And we can see here we've got a triangle. I mentioned earlier I'm a big fan of sawtooth on a filter. That's probably my favourite. And if I use the rate control here and just do that, it's now stopped. We've stopped the LFO, it's not working. But if I bring this up, it's very, very, very slow. In fact, yeah, there it is, it's working now. And we could sit here for a while and that would refire. But if we increase the speed, one of the things on the LFO side that's really useful is when you can get into what we call the audio rate. And here we're getting into the audio rate. We're starting to make it kind of, there we go. We've got, I suppose, like a grey area of the sound, I guess, which is kind of nicely in tune. Some harmonic sympathies happening there. But if we're, so we've got into kind of crazy realms there with the LFO. And that's on the low setting. So if I, let's go again for the high, this time we'll go on the high setting. We're way beyond what we were before now. That's a huge amount of speed on the LFO available. In fact, I think it's up to 1.6 kilohertz, which is an incredibly, I mean, that's kind of a high G, I think. Let's see. Aha, we're back. Sorry about that, Facebook. We had a battery anomaly there. Yeah, the battery's died on us, but we're back in the room now. Sorry about that. So we were talking about the LFOs. Oh, my voice seems even louder now. Maybe it's, yeah, okay. But we were talking about the LFOs and how fast they can run. And they can run up to about 1.6 kilohertz, which is a very high note. That's a G above a treble clef, I think, something like this. And we have two LFOs. So LFO1 is dedicated here to the filter. LFO2 is on the pitch here as well. So again, let's get an initialized sound. Let's put LFO2. This crazy sound with that. So, you know, all of that is wonderful to have. We have three envelopes as well. We have a dedicated envelope for the amplifier. There's always going to be an envelope for the amplifier. Let's get rid of that. And so we can get our nice short sounds like this. And so very nice and quick to have access to the amp envelope at all times. Then we have the mod envelope, and mod envelope 1 is on the is always connected to the filter. Let's bring up the volume of peak now, I think, to compensate. There we go. And then mod envelope 2 is connected to the pitch. So again, I can add a second envelope shape for a bit of drunk synthesizer playing, which is kind of nice. But the mod envelopes, yeah, the envelopes here, the LFOs, all this stuff is all available, and we have a connection on the top panel to be able to connect those two aspects of the synthesizer. But also we have this, which is a very important part of the Peak synthesizer. This is the mod matrix. And the mod matrix is basically an ability to turn the Peak from being a desktop system like this into effectively a modular system as well. Of course, we're not using patch cables or patch points to do that, but what we are doing is using a virtual connection inside the instrument to be able to create these modular things. So we have many destinations. These are the things that we can control with our modulation. And we have 37 different controls here, including all the pitch controls, virtual sync, the shape control, levels, filter, other things as well. You know, for example, LFO1 here. Hang on, let's get an initialized. Okay, so there's LFO1 controlling the filter because it's already here. But if I decided, you know, I want that LFO to kick in, but only when I decide to do it, I can do this quite cleverly here in the mod matrix. So what I'll do is I'll choose the same destination, the filter cutoff, filter frequency. And I will choose my source. I have 16 sources, so modulation sources, things that can modulate. And again, I can choose easily LFO1 plus minus. So it's exactly the same as this control here. And now, if I bring in the depth, we have exactly the same as if I take it down here and put it in here. That's great, but why would I want to do it that way? Well, I might want to combine that LFO with something else. So I could say, okay, let's combine it with this animate switch. So I want to be able to tell the peak when to turn that LFO on, when to trigger that LFO. So if I go to my source here and say, okay, let's go animate 1. Here we go. You see that's lit up now. So now there is no sound. The LFO is where it was left. But now I can now trigger the LFO whenever I want. Maybe I could go a bit one deeper here, and I'll go to slot 2. And this is a second slot in the mod matrix, and this time I'll take the LFO1 rate, and we'll just speed it up a bit. So that'll do. So we'll get to that sort of speed, and this time I'm just going to say put on the animate 2 switch. That is now a control for the speed, for the rate. There's the LFO on animate 1, and now. And of course I can set up a whole variety of different things to work with the animate switch. In fact, one of the sounds I made before we came on air and did the presentation was this. Sorry about the volume there. And this is changing the pitch. So I could even just press the audition button here. I can use the hold button. And so by using the animate switches, I'm basically changing the pitch, the coarse pitch control of oscillator 2 there to create different melody lines. So it's a very powerful system. Now in the mod matrix is something that's a very important thing to mention as well, and that's another feature that Peak has, and this is frequency modulation. So we've got FM synthesis in here. Let's put oscillator 1 on a sine. Okay, all the other oscillators are down. But these are just going to be controllers now, so carriers. And in the mod matrix, I'm going to go to my destination here, and I'm going to take cross modulation, so oscillator 3, and I'm going to use that to start to control oscillator 1. Okay, so oscillator 3, which is an audio oscillator, is now going to be FMing, frequency modulating off oscillator 2. And I'll just put an amount on. We can hear this happen now. So you can hear the FM starting to come in. Okay, now if I start to change the pitch, change the pitch of the oscillator. Start to get to the realms of really nice FM sounds, which is great. Maybe I want to stack another version on top of this. One of the great things is that the FM side of things, we can actually stack. So we could say, okay, I've got this once, I've got this happening once, let's get it done again, and let's add more oscillator 3 onto oscillator 1. And maybe I want to put in an envelope to control that, so we get a nice kind of attack sound, or, you know, kind of an effect of the sound. That's getting nice. Let's put a bit. Okay, it's getting good, and I'm going to go back to mod slot 2, which was the original one, and I'm going to add the same thing. I'm going to put envelope 2 on there. So we've got this wonderful sounding FM style synthesis as well. And the great thing is, of course, it's not just FM with sine waves, which is traditional. This is a sine wave version. But we could have triangle, very similar. Sawtooth, quite a different sound, a bit of crunchy sound. You can hear a bit of crunchy in there. Square. And we've got our wavetable, so we can, let's get something, maybe go for that yo. So that's quite an unusual sound. This is just oscillators, no filtering stuff going on there, but I've got an FM frequency modulation between oscillator 1 and 3 using a wavetable. So that's nice. And if I wanted to, I could go back to my mod slot and say, okay, we've got two oscillator 3 frequency modulating oscillator 1, but if I go to mod slot 3, we can say, okay, this time let's go crazy, and let's take oscillator 1, which is already being FM'd, if you like, by oscillator 3, and let's FM oscillator 2 with that. So now, this is going to get noisy. This is going to basically sound a bit noisy, I think, but... So, you know, we can get really deep into this on the FM side. Nice sound. And then again, now we can go into the filter. So, the frequency modulation side is all in there as well. So that's nice to have. I think I'm pretty much going to finish up now, but there's one last thing that I'll just quickly show. And this is a feature that's on the back of PEAK, and again, just for the sake of the cameras that we have here, I'm not going to really be able to sort of show that, but we've got a CV input on here as well. So again, PEAK will work with your modular stuff. Previously, when we looked at the circuit monostation, we were looking at the CV auxiliary output on here, and I'm just going to quickly set up a very quick CV pattern. So I'm just going to put some steps on here, and this is just simply sending out a CV value to my auxiliary CV output. So let's go to sequence, add that out. I'm going to hit play, and now this little sequence that I've just quickly thrown together on the circuit is outputting through the auxiliary CV. That is where I'm plugged in. Yes, it is. Okay, so maybe now I'm going to put in the filter. On my mod matrix, I'm going to go here to source, to the next slot, and I'm going to choose my filter frequency, and for my control, my source, I'm going to choose CV. So I'm now looking at this input here, which is coming from a CV or maybe from a modular synth or whatever it is you're using. That's coming in, and I go to depth and add some to that, and now so we can hear that CV control is now controlling the filter. Maybe I'll change it from the filter so we get a better idea of what's going on. Let's go to pitch. Yeah, it's a bit too much. Let's bring that down. Okay, it's a bit crazy, but it's working. You know, obviously I had a bit more time, I'd do something a little bit more music with this, but... And again, I can smooth that out. So you can see that the CV is coming in to PEAK, and we're able to, you know, take control there. Let's do this with the... Let's do it very quickly with the... with an initialized patch. So CV, so we get a better idea of what it's able to do. Bring that down, depth up. So, yeah. So we can use that to, you know, take control over the filter. It's quite subtle there. As I say, I could have set up a better sequence perhaps, but anyway, there we go. The idea is that, you know, we have got CV integration as well, so if you're using this alongside a modular, it's going to fit in nicely. So that's the peak. I'm going to finish up now because I've been talking for an hour again. And once again, the same guys here have been so patient. It's been amazing. Thank you. I've had 2 hours of your time today. So thank you very much indeed. And if you've been watching over in Facebook land as well, thank you very much for joining us. My name's Chris Calcott, obviously a product demonstrator, product specialist at Focusrite and Novation. But I'm here over at the AudioSource store in Lausanne, in Switzerland. And if you're looking for information about Peak, there's plenty of videos that are appearing on there now, you know, on YouTube and online with information about Peak. But if you're interested in, you know, hearing it, I really recommend you come into the store and give it a go, give it a listen, and then you'll really get a feel for what this thing can do. But it's a very, very impressive piece of kit, in my opinion, and I think it's, you know, it's quite a special instrument, really, in many, many ways. So I'm going to finish up now. I don't know if anybody has any questions here. No, everybody looks like I've answered everything. Brilliant, thank you. Same on Facebook as well. If anybody's got any questions, get in touch with the guys here at AudioSource, AudioSource.ch, and that will bring you through to their website, and you'll be able to contact the guys here. And we've got some peaks here as well today, so you know, if you're looking to maybe get hold of one, because they are at the moment, you know, they're starting to come into the stores, but they're still quite a find when you see them in the store. So do come in and give them a go. But we have got them here as well, so if you want to get hold of one, pop down and try it out. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, and thanks for joining me on this Saturday. Wonderful day, and yeah, have a great weekend. Thanks very much. Cheers. Are we done? Yeah, good. Cool, thank you very much.